Good morning, and welcome everyone to our session on CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan compliance and auditing. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, Congress appropriated $4.7 trillion in emergency assistance. This massive influx of funds into the economy flowed down from federal agencies to state and local governments, as well as the healthcare system, other businesses, and people. Amidst the public health and economic crises, government at every level was asked for immediate assistance. Consistent with the urgency of serious and widespread health issues and economic disruptions, government gave priority to acting quickly to distribute funds and implement new programs. Normally, when governments are designing or making changes to programs, they establish mechanisms to maintain transparency and accountability early on. These mechanisms provide safeguards and reasonable assurance that government funds reach the intended people, are used for the intended purposes, and help ensure program integrity. However, the pandemic often resulted in a trade-off between urgency and the government's transparency and accountability goals. My name is Jesse Carpenter, and I'm a CPA and partner at Cotton & Company. Cotton & Company is a licensed CPA firm, and we specialize in government assurance and advisory services. And I'm here today because we've prioritized working closely with federal agencies, state and local governments to help them demonstrate accountability and transparency in the use of emergency funding. For instance, we assist government auditors with performance audits and compliance examinations, and we also provide advisory services to management. Our experience in this area led us to see the tremendous value we could bring to AGA by inviting 3 experts from each level of government to share their unique perspectives from the local, state, and federal levels. We have with us today 3 esteemed panelists. From the local perspective, we have Mr. Chris Horton, who's the County Auditor for Arlington County, and he's also the current president of the Association of Local Government Auditors. We also have, from the state level, Ms. Kathy McGinnis, the Delaware State Auditor, and from the federal level, Ms. Amy Franz, the current Deputy Inspector General for Audit Services for the Department of Health and Human Services. Each panelist is going to share some of their experience and insights, and then we plan to have time for question and answers. Please submit and vote for questions that you'd like to hear about. And if the question is for a specific panelist, please note that in the question. And with that, we'll hand it off to Mr. Horton.
Well, thank you very much, Jesse. Appreciate the invitation to participate in this panel. I'm going to be speaking to you today as primarily the president of the Association of Local Government Auditors. Even though I am the county auditor for Arlington, I really wanted to provide our attendees a little bit of a broader perspective of the different kinds of ways that localities are grappling with the various issues presented by CARES Act funding and the ARPA funding. Next slide, please. As most folks know, local government audit shops have faced varying responsibilities. For example, under the CARES Act, localities under 500,000 in population received relief funds as a pass-through from the states. In some cases, the funding formulas were different, and audit shops were tasked with understanding how their state was distributing funds. So definitely there's a difference between being a direct recipient and a subrecipient. The manner in which funds were distributed then had an impact on where the relevant guidance came from. Was it just from the Treasury Department, or were various state requirements in play? ARPA funds have created a similar situation, though with a lower population threshold. A further interesting wrinkle is that under ARPA, every county is a direct recipient. So even a county of a few thousand people is getting direct funds from Treasury. This likely will make the U.S. Treasury the cognizant agency for things like several thousand direct recipients without the knowledge to deal with being direct recipients. So Treasury does not currently have the infrastructure to support these folks. What's going to happen? We're still going to be waiting and working with Treasury to figure out ways that they can support all of those counties that do not currently have the infrastructure to deal with the compliance needs of these ARPA funds. In terms of managing the requirements and the different responsibilities that audit shops have, in some cases, audit shops have been involved on the front end, advising management about how to comply with various requirements, while also trying as much as possible to follow audit standards. For example, one county office that I know of developed a white paper with their analysis of various state and federal guidance and distributed this to management. The goal was to show criteria that would be used to audit if or when a later local audit was performed. ALGA as an organization has worked to assist by participating in various intergovernmental working groups, such as one organized by the PRAC and another one organized by GAO and NASACT. I've also seen and been part of several ad hoc information sharing groups. There's been one organized through Virginia Tech, for example, and even those organized by practitioners leveraging their own personal network. As we go through this presentation, I would love to see some examples of other ways that people have been able to see information sharing and stay up on the development of the CARES Act and ARPA funding requirements. For example, professional associations, universities, personal networks, or something else entirely. If you're able to, why don't you share some of the things that you all have seen and used to be able to stay up in the questions, and then just note that this is a comment in reaction to this particular request. Next slide, please. Most of the local government audit shop work product that we have seen thus far relates to the CARES Act. I want to point out some great examples of different ways that our local shops have tackled the myriad issues and dynamic environment of CARES Act funds. First, we have had some great bread and butter audit and analysis that focuses on compliance and controls. For example, the City and County of Denver put out an audit this past July that assessed how well their finance department had managed the city's process for spending $127 million in federal aid from the Coronavirus Relief Fund. The audit gave a generally good grade to the finance department and recommended better guidance to agencies on how to document individual transactions. I really particularly liked how this report highlighted the decision-making process in an infographic for its readers. By contrast, the City of Richmond, Virginia performed a non-audit service for a review of the city's expenditure tracking practices from March through July of 2020. So very early on in the pandemic, the city auditor's office in Richmond was trying to give some critical early insight into issues that management might need to address while the opportunities were still available to fix the problem. A second bucket of locality work has been that some localities have looked at the CARES Act and the pandemic response from a broader lens. One example of this is from King County, Washington. King County looked not only at controls over federal emergency funding, but also employee safety, remote work, customer service, furloughs, public records compliance, and voluntary separation. The audit team identified early issues with several programs funded by the Coronavirus Relief Fund involving subrecipients and outside beneficiaries. They evaluated the adequacy of controls over internal documentation and the design of several programs that distributed funds to subrecipients and beneficiaries outside the county. The audit team communicated issues to executive staff, who subsequently corrected the issues for the affected programs. For subsequent programs, executive staff also incorporated changes that addressed concerns to program documentation. While looking at this issue around compliance, the audit also identified a broader issue, and they recommended that planning for future emergencies include a complete safety framework across all agencies and branches of government, and to include a focus on equity. I think that this particular audit highlights a way that localities can really add value to their communities by looking not only at nuts and bolts compliance, but also by looking at a broader lens of implementation and program effectiveness. In a similar vein, the Chicago Office of Inspector General conducted an audit of data privacy and cybersecurity in the COVID-19 contact tracing program, a very interesting angle to look at. The objective of the audit was to determine if the Chicago Department of Public Health managed privacy and cybersecurity risks associated with the collection, storage, and transmittal of COVID-19 contact tracing data in accordance with the City of Chicago's information security and technology policies and the US CDC's guidance. The Inspector General's office concluded that the COVID-19 contact tracing program mitigated data privacy and cybersecurity risks. And although certain improvements to policies and procedures would encourage consistent and timely application of the security measures, the department had efforts to safeguard data that suggested that the public's personal information would be protected. Finally, another way of taking a look at CARES Act and the CARES Act funding is by taking a look at performance related to the context of a larger audit of a topic. For example, the city of Scottsdale, Arizona, conducted an overall audit to review performance measures and cost effectiveness of its economic development programs. Within that audit, but not limited to this topic, the auditor's office found that the department spent 22% of its small business assistance pandemic relief funds, including $625,000 in pandemic-related reimbursement grants and $74,000 for a small business training program. This was out of about $3.5 million of funding that was available. The business support programs were not continued with the remaining funds to assist additional businesses. This lack of funding usage was due to a narrow application timeframe and restrictive application criteria. So very interesting, and some things that other folks who are going to be looking at similar topics would be able to learn from to be able to help their own communities. Next slide, please. We have not had much opportunities in our localities to do audit work related to the American Rescue Plan Act. Similar to CARES Act work, audit offices have been involved on the front end of advising management about how to comply with various requirements while also following audit standards. The following audit standards part has also created some interesting conundrums for local governments. Most local government auditors that I have spoken with have tried to avoid getting involved in management functions related to pandemic relief, but that has not always been the case. Some offices have drawn a red line and stated that doing any management function goes against policy. Other offices have provided research assistance or provided administrative staff even to assist with frontline work. And in at least one case that I know of, an audit management member actually oversaw a COVID-19 quarantine hotel. Finally, at least one office that I know of was intimately involved in developing the internal controls for the funding process and managing some internal processes for their locality. As a result, they've determined that they lack the independence to audit whether the county was compliant with its funding requirements. The point of this is not to second guess any of these decisions, but to point out that in this unprecedented crisis, different audit shops had to confront a dilemma between doing their regular job of accountability and providing their skills to address a massive humanitarian crisis. Different shops made different choices based on their local context, and it remains to be seen whether the standard-setting bodies will take any of these issues into account as peer reviews begin to be performed again. In my opinion, I hope that they do. I'll now hand it over to Kathy McGinnis for the state-level perspective.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me. It is quite an honor to be here, and I'm very excited. And I want to share a little bit about what we've done in regards to the American Rescue Plan, or ARP funds. So next. A little bit about my journey. I'm not sure if you know, but many of the auditors in the country, the state auditors, are legislative, and they might work directly for their General Assembly. Some of us are elected, and some are appointed. So we do all have different roles and responsibilities. I was elected for almost 18 years as a city commissioner in Rehoboth Beach, making a whopping $50 a month, but what was holding people accountable then and not afraid to ask the questions. My background is I am a business owner and pharmacist as well, and been very involved in the community. Next. So this is the Delaware State Auditor. We are elected. It's a 4-year term. And we want to make sure you get a fair deal for your money. And with that, we do several types of engagements. Again, this varies from state to state. We have worked on group national audits where some folks don't even have a performance audit group or division. We also serve on the Board of Pardons, and it's now called the Enterprise Service Delivery Committee. Next. Something we did early on, we unveiled it and we updated every Monday. Is the CARES Act Fund Tracker, which we actually track the funds the state agencies are paying. It's super easy super easy to use. And what this does is allows the public to go on to a site and hover over and see the money that an agency has received and what they spent. Now, this is from the first, unprecedented amount of funds, the CARES Act funds. And I believe as of yesterday, we have only spent about 88% of those CARES Act funds. Next. So what I'm really here to talk about is something that's a historic initiative. And it's a historic initiative for Delaware. We have a lot of work to do. In 2016, we had ranked C+ in transparency, and now we are at D+. So we're kind of going in the wrong state. But what this is a transparency portal. As you can read on the slide, this allows the monies that go directly to the cities and the towns, monies that go to the counties, and then state agencies and schools. It is allowing those to be tracked. What's different about this is the cities and towns got their monies as a pass-through through our treasurer. And the other folks are getting it directly. So the ones that are getting it directly that are on the state system, like our school districts, we actually are doing the work and pulling that information. So when you go on to our site, you're going to be able to log down and see actually not even how it was coded, but all the way to the expense and the vendor. You're going to get a lot of detail. What people want to know and what they stop me in the hallway or in the grocery store is, how is this money going to be spent and how is it going to affect me? So this is a historic initiative. I do name my projects Gray Fox. It's the state wildlife animal, and it's had to adapt for 7 to 10 million years. So as do we, especially in these unprecedented times. Next. So this is a model that we have, and we're happy to share with anyone. But from what we understand, this will reduce in manual input, FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests, manual reporting as well. And this allows all of our Delawareans to be the fiscal watchdog. They can actually have this information at their fingertips. And what I spoke to on the previous slide is this is voluntary. So this is voluntary for the counties and the cities and the towns. The ones that are affiliated with the state, we can pull directly. So we're really excited because we've just launched a bunch of town halls and just had our first one, and there is a lot of interest. Next. So these are some of the entities. Delaware's a very small state. I say we're a small state, but we're a large community. We're about 2 hours long. So it's easy to be in every county every day and serve your constituents. These are the folks that need to be applauded. And I do like to have their name on a slide or talk about them in public only because they're demonstrating to their constituents they actually care about accountability and transparency and good governance. And they want to make sure that their constituents have access to how they're spending money that directly affects them. Something else I want to note, due to a variety of limitations within a state contractor that we have that usually helps us with our technical side, we actually contracted this out with one of the nation's leader in cloud and tech-based services, and they're called OpenGov. So we are actually partnering with them, even though we are building a lot of this out ourselves. Next. So something I like to say, and I think somebody might have mentioned it earlier, but the traditional role of the auditor is to, show up at the end and then talk about fraud, waste, and abuse, how the money was spent. And here we're trying to be proactive and help officials track their spending in a transparent way as it happens. We're only asking folks a couple minutes a week to go log into their portal, those who have volunteered, the municipalities and the counties, and put that information in. So this also, we continue to monitor a very active and engaging hotline. The fraud hotline, we have a fraud division, very small in our small office, but we can also work at the same time to look for reporting of fraud, waste, and abuse of these ARP funds. But something that's, I think that pulls this all together is the idea of making the first state first in accountability and first in transparency. The idea is instead of all these different entities putting information in their own software system, and then it's not revealed to the end of the year if somebody cares to look at their report that goes to the US Treasury. This allows almost real time. And the folks that have signed on and actually went through, and we do the trainings once a week, they are now, I just had another mayor say, I want to do a testimonial. This is amazing. The majority of our municipalities, we have 55, almost 50, and we're trying to verify, qualify that entering it into the auditor site under Gray Fox at the end of the year, that can, with a couple clicks, turn into the report that they will be submitting to the US Treasury. So this is saving time and money. It's easy. It shows good governance, and we are, really excited about those who are participating, but also those who are looking to participate as well. I'm not going to say this was 100% our role, and this is what we should be doing. So we took a very proactive approach. We launched our first town hall. We're doing one in every county, and we will continue to do that for the next couple of years. Our response on Monday night was we had mostly electeds and folks from just different municipalities in person. And then the folks that went either online or Facebook or, the Zoom invite were not elected. So we're hoping to get a better mix in public or be able to interact a little more and be able to answer questions, because the majority of the questions we've heard are, what can we spend it on? And we let them know it's, communication and training or infrastructure or payroll costs. But the important thing is, what can't you spend it on? Because as you know, if you've looked at those buckets and then the sub buckets, we have to think of a name for that. They're set, they're standard. It's a little general, and they have time to spend it. I like to let folks know as well, if there's a bunch of zeros when you hit on a tile, that means they haven't reported or they haven't spent yet. So it's really exciting. We've had great response in the country as well, and other states are, asking about doing this. This last page here, we have our homepage, we have our CARES Act Fund Tracker, and we have Gray Fox. As you know, during COVID, we've all had to adapt, as did the Gray Fox for 7 to 10 million years. But this came to my mind when I thought, we're going out to restaurants and they don't usually have menus anymore. You hold up your phone and you scan it with the QR code. So we decided to make that something as well. We've been trying to shift ourselves in our office to work with best practices, but immediately shift. I don't know if I had told you in the beginning, but I was elected and took office as the auditor on January 1st, 2019. However, my predecessor was in for 30 years. And I think about half my staff is under 30. So the majority of the adults in the state know a completely different office and style. He started with about 60 auditors. I started with about 7. So we have been trying to do the outreach, trying to look at best practices. And that's why I did bring in an outside firm to actually audit my office and then put those over 50 findings on our website so the public could see the work that we had to do and accomplish. But COVID hit, and we've all had to transition. We've all had to adapt. And here we are with this unprecedented amount of money, first time, and now the ARP funds. And I feel that it's good they have a little bit longer to spend it, because it can be a little more thoughtful, or they've gotten committees together or looked at their comprehensive development plan or have a task force. However, I do know people are afraid to spend it as well, because I know the guidance changed the first time. So there is some hesitation, what we're hearing from some communities, and they also want to make sure they get the best bang for their buck, because now there's infrastructure money that's coming our way to all the different states. And do you want to spend in that bucket of infrastructure if there might be other monies coming your way, or a possibility for collaboration with the county or maybe a neighboring city or the state? So there's a lot to think about. It's very exciting to have this opportunity to be thoughtful and meaningful with these funds. And we just wanted to be that vehicle, not to judge, not to direct how to spend your money, but just show the public this is what your folks are doing in your community because you asked. Thank you. So next, and there's some of our social media, I think, on the last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. And then we'll hand it off to Amy.
Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be a part of this panel and hope that you are enjoying the conference so far. I will be discussing our efforts at HHS OIG to oversee COVID-19 response and recovery. Next slide. First, I'll start with the funding. As you can see, HHS received $462 billion in funding for COVID-19 relief, which includes funding for the CARES Act, the American Rescue Plan, and 4 other COVID relief laws. For our oversight at OIG, we've received $19 million to oversee both CARES Act and the ARP funding. During my presentation, I will mention some of our audit oversight areas. Next slide. To guide our oversight with respect to HHS COVID-19 response and recovery, we developed a strategic plan with 4 main goals to drive our planning and mission execution. The goals are: first, protect people; 2, protect the funds; 3, protect infrastructure; and 4, promote effectiveness of HHS programs now and in the future. This plan highlights our main objectives and ongoing and potential OIG work to advance in each goal. Next slide. Our oversight includes CDC, NIH, FDA, and CMS, as well as many other operating divisions in over 100 HHS programs. As you can see, our oversight of HHS is vast. Next slide. To aid us in identifying issues and help us direct our work to optimize our impact, we use risk assessments and data analytics to identify, monitor, and target potential fraud, waste, and abuse affecting HHS programs and beneficiaries, and to promote the effectiveness of HHS COVID-19 response and recovery programs. While we have primarily focused on the pandemic, our oversight extends beyond COVID-19 to include other emergency events, such as natural disasters, as we have most recently seen the devastating impact of Hurricane Irma. Our work can uncover gaps in HHS preparedness and planning efforts and investments to drive improvements, and also provide rapid feedback to program directors in the midst of an emergency response or recovery effort. Some of our examples of our oversight are included on this slide, such as grants, contracts, and cybersecurity. Next slide. In overseeing HHS response and recovery efforts related to COVID-19, there are several audit areas where we have focused our work, including program operations, awarding and monitoring, internal controls, compliance, and funding. For example, we have ongoing audits reviewing the awarding and monitoring of contracts for ventilators and COVID-19 test kits. For our audits of internal controls, we have ongoing work that examines the operation of the Strategic National Stockpile and the allocation of testing supplies and related services to tribal health programs. Regarding the use of COVID funding, we have ongoing work to determine whether health centers use their COVID-19 supplementary grant funding in accordance with federal requirements and grant terms. Next slide. To date, we have issued 5 audit reports that cover a wide range of topics, including childcare, opioids, hospital preparedness, and the completeness and accuracy of COVID-19 data for nursing homes. We have a dedicated COVID-19 webpage that lists all our completed reports, which I'll provide a visual of the landing page on the last slide of my presentation. Next slide. To date, we have announced 42 COVID-19 related audits. This slide shows some examples of important work that we have ongoing. For the Provider Relief Fund, we're conducting a series of audits reviewing HHS control and provider compliance. For nursing homes, we are reviewing whether long-term care facilities complied with new federal requirements for life safety and emergency and infectious disease control preparedness. We also have 2 ongoing cybersecurity audits that will review the controls for the healthcare COVID-19 portal and the effectiveness of HHS governance to ensure hospitals implemented measures to prevent, detect, and recover from cyber attacks. Next slide. Earlier in my presentation, I shared the audit reports that we have issued, but I also want to share with you some of our other significant products and collaborations related to the COVID-19 oversight. Our Office of Evaluation has issued a number of COVID-19 related products, including 2 shown here, related to on-site surveys conducted at nursing homes and hospital challenges in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. Also of note, our Office of Investigation has been coordinating with key oversight and law enforcement partners and has issued a number of enforcement actions and a fraud alert related to COVID-19 scams. That includes ways to protect yourself. Some examples of ways to protect yourself include: 1, do not share photos of your COVID-19 vaccination cards on social media. Be suspicious of any unexpected calls or visitors offering COVID-19 tests or supplies. If you receive a suspicious call, hang up immediately. And 3, do not respond to or open hyperlinks in text messages about COVID-19 from unknown individuals. For additional information, we have a dedicated website that I encourage you to visit. Our OIG continues to collaborate with PRAC on the federal government's COVID Response and Recovery Act. The PRAC is composed of federal inspector generals, including HHS OIG, to work to ensure adequate oversight, avoid duplication, and share insights. Christy Grimm, our Principal Deputy Inspector General and IG nominee, is the chair of and actively involved in the Healthcare Subcommittee. A recent collaboration example that our OIG participated in with 5 other federal OIGs reported out on our respective agencies' efforts related to the federal government's role in COVID-19 testing. This data brief can provide transparency and inform policymakers about COVID-19 testing resources in federal programs. Next slide. Lastly, I want to close with showing our COVID-19 webpage, which can be easily found by going to our website as shown here. There are many resources included on this webpage that provide further insights on the types of work our OIG conducts, along with enforcement actions and related policy and guidance. This concludes my presentation. We will now move into the Q&A portion. I turn it back over to you, Jesse, and thank you.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Kathy and Chris as well, for all your insight and for sharing your experience. I see that we do have a number of questions, and I think we should be able to go through most, if not all of them. I'm going to attempt to try to group them by the most appropriate panelists to answer the question initially, so they, just for the audience's awareness, they may not follow the prioritization based on your votes, but we will make sure that we get to those that are voted the highest. Before I start off with the question and answers, I wanted to revisit the question that Mr. Horton had asked during his presentation. If you have any experiences with the monitoring of changes for the requirements of CARES or ARPA, and you have any methodologies that you've used to do that monitoring, please share that via the Q&A. I understand that that's not a traditional method to use Q&A, but we're really interested to see how you're keeping abreast of changes, and it would allow us to use a ranking system. So if you're using the same method that someone else entered, you could vote that up. Again, it's not traditional, but if you do have any feedback on that, we'd be really interested in hearing it. So with that, I'm going to jump into Q&A, and I'm going to start out with a few questions for you, Kathy. Okay, so for the first question is, how is Delaware ensuring that providers and businesses that receive PPP loans, government grants and contracts are not, quote unquote, double dipping?
We did not, at least the auditor's office was not part of oversight, or I would even say distribution, a task force like Newcastle County in regards to these funds for the CARES Act monies. So we weren't part of the process in the distribution. What we do rely on is our hotline, our fraud hotline. We get, I'll put it to you this way. This past fiscal year, we had over 1,000 tips by phone call, by our fraud app that we developed at fraud.delaware.gov. We used to have people actually walk in the door, but this past fiscal year, over 1,000. That was more than the previous 10 years combined. So what we have to do as far as our job and monitoring different entities is we have a risk-based audit plan where we actually send out a survey, and that usually has a heat map, and we see things in different entities rise to the top, which 9 times out of 10, we're finding that kind of mirrors our fraud hotline with complaints where those same entities might happen as well. So if this is not something like the PPP loans or what have you, or something that's on our radar or built into our audit plan, if we have a lot of requests, we will be looking into that engagement and then following up. Again, as an auditor, you're looking kind of after the fact. And we all know right now with unemployment insurance fraud, I think every state's dealing with that. So we're trying to get a handle on that one because that's coming to us from everywhere, from complaints in person as well. But as far as that particular topic, unless something rises to the top or becomes part of our plan, which it could be, we do have mandates, but we do have some flexibility, then we won't be doing any oversight.
Thank you, Kathy. Another question for you.
Okay.
The question is, if voluntary and not everyone is reporting, how are you keeping track of all dollars spent?
We're not, because it is voluntary. We can control what we can control. For example, our school districts are on the state financial budgeting system. So we can pull that information. We can pull state agencies and the spend. We cannot pull from a municipality that chooses not to participate. It is voluntary. And that's why we're doing the outreach in town halls, just like we did the other night. We had someone from a municipality and said, I want to do this. This is fantastic. So here we've gotten more. That's the gist of it. It is voluntary. We're getting the word out, and it really is coming from the bottom up. So in the municipalities, when you have someone in a community or incorporated or even a non-incorporated area, and they are not participating, we say you need to go speak to your elected officials, because we cannot pressure them to do it. We can only offer.
Okay. And how does the CARES Act fund tracker, how is it different than the Gray Fox project?
Very different. The Gray Fox project, which is going to have a fund tracker, is specific to the American Rescue Plan Act funds, the ARP funds. The CARES Act fund tracker is for the CARES Act funds. So they're two separate entities and two separate methods of tracking.
Okay. And I think the last question for this round, Kathy, how are you letting your citizens know about these programs, portals, and the QR code efforts?
Pound in the pavement, things like this, where I can share. Outreach, we do social media. We post every day on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and we know, what 70% of the people get their information from their devices here. The town halls. So after work, there's a group of us, and we're going around and taking the show on the road. We call it the Gray Fox Tour. Kind of, we're even going to make up some concert shirts. Just kidding, but with the dates on the back. But so honestly, we're doing everything we can. When I get to an opportunity to speak to a chamber or a Rotary, person to person at an event, we're letting them know about the Gray Fox. And I'm proud to say there's a very large music festival that's starting. I think the lineup starts tomorrow, but they're opening today, and And we have folks that are between 20 and 25 attending Firefly, and they're going to be talking about Gray Fox, which I think is pretty remarkable for, you know, our young generation, which you're probably a part of.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Kathy. There'll probably be some more questions for you here, but we'll give you a break here for a second. Next question is for Mr. Horton. Chris, are local governments still hesitant to use relief funds because of the lack of guidance and the uncertainty of its uses?
That may be true in some cases, but what we've seen within ALGA is that the local governments have been remarkably receptive to using the relief funds. One of the things that we were wondering about was to the extent to which the pandemic and the resulting downturn in economic activity because of, you know, loss of sales tax revenue, loss of hotel occupancy revenue, things of that nature would significantly impact the funding for the audit offices. And what we have been very pleased to see so far is that many localities have been able to have their funding stabilized through the relief funds. And so many of our local audit shops have been able to they've seen some impacts in some cases, perhaps not furloughs, but not where they're laying people off, where they might have to take some furlough days, things of that nature. But that seems to be the significant extent of the impact. In most cases, the funding has been pretty significantly stable. And that indicates, I think, that the localities themselves have been able to use these relief funds very well and very strategically to be able to plug the gaps as it was originally intended by the federal funders.
Thank you, Chris. I have a few questions that I think we'll start off with Amy. Amy, first question for you. Does the HHS OIG coordinate with the FRAC on the COVID-19 audit areas? And if so, in what capacity?
Yeah, so we are heavily involved in the PRAC. As I mentioned, our Principal Deputy Inspector General chairs the Health Subcommittee. We've led one overall project, which was of the COVID-19 testing, but we have a lot with our data analytics shop that is providing and working with PRAC, because we have probably one of the top data analytic groups in the OIGs. So we meet regularly and provide significant input, especially just with 462 billion. There's a lot of funds that are moving through healthcare.
Thank you, Amy. And another question, how does HHS coordinate with the Department of Labor regarding CARES Act, unemployment insurance, and other related efforts? And what are some of the challenges associated with that coordination? And if there are challenges, what would help address those challenges?
So I would say from PRAC is one that brings the community together. We also have the Council of Integrity for Inspector Generals. So we do formulate relationships, I know, both with the Department of Labor and the Treasury and Social Security. We do try to obviously communicate and share as much data that we can. And sometimes we will kind of look at the data holistic and see where some of the gaps exist. They might have one audit going on, but we might have an audit going on from the healthcare side in the impact. Always challenges. Some of it is just data standards, making sure the data that we're looking at is comparable. But I think overall, each year we get better and better as we get more and more data available to us. I think the SIGI and the PRAC community are working really well to look at where we can take holistic looks, especially in the fraud area.
Thank you, Amy. And I'm going to ask each of the panelists this question, but we can start out with you, Amy, since you've got the mic, so to speak. How does the OIG, or in the case of state and local governments, the equivalent, the audit organizations, how do they decide what programs or what recipients of CARES Act and the ARP are going to be audited?
Very much like Kathy talked about, was we rely heavily on risk assessment and also looking at prior work. Some of the funding coming in was just supplementing or adding to programs that already existed. And in those cases, we might have already had knowledge. And in some cases, we've seen agencies within HHS double or triple funding that they've had in the past in their annual budget. So obviously, those were things that we really kind of honed in on to ensure what we've seen, what type of controls. I will say from a new program perspective, one of the things that we have been doing in the last 3 to 4 months that has been led by the White House and OMB is pulling together the PRAC and the OIG associated with the new programs and having the program managers brief and talk to us about the internal controls that they have aligned or already have in place. Those have been very informational. They've also been very giving us an opportunity to share some things that they should be thinking about as far as when they go forward with executing the new program. And it's opened the door. So we've definitely been doing some technical assist. I think Chris mentioned independence is important from the federal OIG community. So in that perspective, we're not dictating or providing them specific steps and managing the program in any way, but we are using lessons learned and just some of the basic internal control structure and highlighting some high risk areas to them.
Thank you, Amy. And I'll ask the same question of you, Chris, and just to repeat, how at Arlington County, but also more broadly and from your perspective across local government, how would you decide what programs or what recipients of CARES Act and ARP to audit?
So similar to Amy, it's going to be driven by a risk assessment that really takes into account the fact pattern for each locality and each audit shop. In Arlington County, as an example, one of the things that we were able to do internally is that we have a pretty significant internal capacity for managing federal dollars. We're used to managing federal dollars. And there's already a pretty good process in place for being able to manage those. In addition, we had quite a few federal emergency management monies that flowed through to Arlington County. And we had a consultant who was engaged to do that, to be able to help out with the oversight and compliance areas. So for me as an auditor, what I have to do is take a look at where can I add the most value very quickly, and areas where there was already some significant capacity and significant assistance. I might want to pivot to areas where there is not as much capacity. So for example, we're providing funding to small businesses for grants. Many of these funds are going to businesses that do not have a lot of capacity to be able to provide the kind of documentation that we need. That's an area of bigger risk. And another and related area is, are we providing the kind of capacity development that we need to for those mom and pop kind of businesses? Maybe there's 2 or 3 people involved in the business, and they're actually involved in trying to keep the business afloat, much less fill out a bunch of forms that need to be filled out to get some grant monies. So those are the kinds of areas that I really wanted to be thinking about further, because I think that that's where we can add more value on top of what the organization's already doing. That, other organizations may have thought about risk differently. They may have come up with a different risk profile for their locality. That's how I used it, but everyone's going to be trying to be sensitive to the facts on the ground, as it were, for their particular organization.
Thank you, Chris. It looks like we have just 1 minute left, and so there's still some questions, but unfortunately we're running out of time here. Let me just ask the last one for you, Chris, since you've got the mic. Are you concerned about unused funding from CARES Act and other emergency funds from the perspective of program effectiveness. And as an auditor and representative of local government auditors, do you plan to investigate, report, and make recommendations related to undistributed amounts?
I think the short answer to that is yes, we are concerned, our localities are concerned about that. I don't have a lot of information to suggest that this is a big problem, but in pockets there may be issues. And I think that this is the Scottsdale audit that I highlighted during my presentation spoke to this, and there's really opportunities for us to take a look, even from an after action perspective, to see if there was some unused opportunities and how we might be able to get better as an organization.
Okay. And Chris, you had mentioned several different audits, and we had shared some of the links in the chat throughout the presentation, but we will share those after the fact. You'll be able to find those in the resources tab after the session closes and once AGA is able to post them. So if you weren't able to pull those, just know that they're out there if you're interested in taking a look at those. Being a minute over here, I want to thank our panelists for joining us today. You really provided some really interesting and valuable insight and experience. So thank you so much. And thank you to the audience for joining us for the AGA Internal Control and Fraud Conference. Hope you have a great day and a great conference.